All right, hi everybody. I decided that I was going to put together, after doing some thinking, based on the ACC experience. I think I have a little bit of a better understanding and a reminder, for what it takes, I think, when it comes to research and research productivity. And I think that also in light of recently going to TCT, really thinking about things in the direction that I think is going to be most useful specifically for the purposes of conducting research with the aim of clinical fellowship in cardiology, and at the same time also recognizing that there's a varied amount of experience. So I think the thing that I've thought about in concatenating this is in a presentation. And so talking about organizing and setting a plan. So I put together this brief presentation to kind of go over this again. And so I know I presented this earlier about organization in an earlier presentation last time, where you want to divide your time accordingly. You only have so much free time, right? We know that there's 168 hours in a week. We know that productivity levels off between around 50 to 55 hours, and at which point afterwards there's a diminishing return. And we do understand that not putting all your eggs in one basket, which is just general advice about anything when you're looking at having some diversification, if you will. So I think that it's important to divide your time accordingly, and I think that for you to identify and recognize where are your times that you're going to be most productive, and where are the times and specific times in which might lend themselves better to better times than others to committing to research. So one thing is about SMART goals, again, specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-based. You really want to have some deadlines. So that's going to be very important. I created this here. This is my plan is to eventually have this so that it's a living document, so that what you're going to be able to do is you're going to be able to update and then also refer directly to the guidelines, not guidelines, excuse me, the conferences. So you can see here that what I've created here is a spreadsheet, and then when you expand this, this is programmed in a way so you have you have the conferences and the link to the respective society and submission portal. So for these conferences, you can you also have it by week as well. So the deadlines and conferences. For example, if I were to do this, and this is something that I've demoed before in the past, where you can help make Excel very useful for you, specifically in terms of statistical analysis. But what I'm going to do here is I am going to do this by, I can do this by G. And so what you can see here, well, it's not quite set up exactly, but what you can see here in the gradient here is that you can see that I don't have deadlines set up for these. They've already passed, but if they were upcoming, I can change it. For example, let's say the deadline for HFSA is roughly, I think it's usually in April. So if I type that in here, you can see how that changes, right? But and the programming here is just basically the date, the column on the right, -14, to give yourself some time. So anyways, this is just an example here. I think that this is a useful to help guide you. I think one of the challenges, ideally, you have your things all set up. But what you want to try to shoot for is this way. It allows you some time to review and everything. And I'll talk a little bit about that a little bit later. This is also a slide I've shared with before, and I think it's the key to success is grouping. You really there's a saying that goes that if you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go far, go together. And I really do believe that this is very true. I think the things that I've seen where it's been very successful in people who have been able to publish, people who have been able to present in abstracts, is being able to work together in a group. So I do think that that's very important. I think that you got to have a right team. And I think one of the things that where I benefit the most is when you're on a team of like-minded people, everyone who is motivated, everyone who has got a specific role. So that's also important, not just the SMART goals, not just knowing exactly when is the deadline and having some idea of a terminal endpoint, but also as well as what everyone's roles are. Okay. One thing that I've observed is that, I think there's a difference. It's very important for us to begin to distinguish a difference between doing research and being productive in research and merely having a research experience. But in the application, I mean, everyone can put a research experience. You could, and maybe that might constitute, for lack of a more way of saying this is that you joining a WhatsApp group and maybe like doing like the weekly meetings that we do, that could be a research experience. But the thing is, what I think that people are most interested in is not necessarily an experience. People are most interested because the applicants, the people that are looking at the programs, they're looking to see how productive someone is. And so it would be remiss to provide an experience without appropriately and properly providing the guidance, I think, to be able to get someone to a stage where they're able to present something at a conference. And so this was an observation that I've made prior to TCT, as well as also in looking at the people that were presenting in the conferences. And so really kind of this has been an evolutionary sort of thing, and colored by my own individual experiences in research. So as well as mentoring others, and what I found to be very helpful is really having a group. You really aren't going to be able to get anywhere without a group. And I do recognize also that the challenge is that when you have everyone's got a lot of demands in their time. And so I think that the next important point here is that the personnel in the group, you want to have, they should be ideally readily available and be able to commit within the to assist in a project within a given time frame. So coming back to the idea of SMART goals, you want to have some idea what the end point is, right? I mean, if you have this idea of, you're going to submit something maybe down the road, the problem is that if you don't exactly know when, it's really difficult to really get something going. And especially, there's also the illusion of more time than you really have. And an additional point too, as well, is that when you have a lot of time, let's just say, for example, right now we're in the end of October, and you want to submit something to American Heart Association. The deadline for AHA is usually about the first or second week of May. So you're talking about almost 6 months from now, right? That's a lot of time. But when you factor in that maybe you might have several months in CCU, maybe you have several months in night float, maybe you go on vacation. Interspersed with that, you may have a great, excellent idea for a project. You might collect data, you might have some idea about things, but then you might, because of these interruptions, and life will happen to as well, and you come back to it 3 months later, you don't exactly remember okay, what was the zero? If you're doing it right, then you might have a clear code book. But if you may not remember the genesis of a project, you might forget a lot of important elements. So I think there's an illusion of time because of the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve. So when you have the forgetting curve, I mean, you're going to have some points in which, that's why I think measurable goals and having an idea of a concrete idea about, okay, well, what is the project? What do we need to do? And who's available to do the project? It's not simply about committing, oh, I would love to get, everybody would love to get published in every single thing. But the other important thing I should also point out too as well is that if you have more than one project on hand, and I can speak on this myself outside of the application process, but it is challenging when you have a lot of other things going on. Never mind your clinical responsibilities, never mind personal life, your own commitments. There's a lot that's going on. So what you want to have in a group is that the SMART goals is important, as well as having the personnel who's going to be readily available within the time frame. I would think of this as coalitions. I think coalitions, not everyone may be readily available at all times to the project. So this could be very helpful where you want a group where you're going to have enough people. And if, say, somebody is busy, someone has a night float, someone has an intensive care unit, that maybe there might be somebody else who might be able to deputize in that position. So somebody else who might be on there. And what might be an ideal balance and the right mixture might be pairing someone who might be a medical student or an intern with the role of someone who might be a little bit more senior, whether it be a second year, maybe a third year, someone who's already graduated residency. So I think that's also very important that, one of the other barriers that I think many people get the trepidation when it comes to research is that the idea is that, well, I don't have experience. Maybe I don't know where to start. So one thing that I think is probably the biggest thing to overcome is the notion that, that every task will require experience. Obviously, if one who is more well-versed in statistical analysis is going to be able to to lend themselves to the analysis part. Someone who is a third year or an attending or who has a background, a deeper clinical background, or maybe even a basic sciences background in a given field, are going to be able to contribute a lot more to, say, someone who might have learned something in a lecture and took it for an exam in medical school in the first 2 years. So yes, there is a spectrum, but I think one of the biggest powerful things in this group is frankly not me. I don't think it's, yes, I have a lot of experience in lots of different areas. I also have a lot of experience that I don't have, that you all have as well. And one thing that I've seen time and again in conferences is that there's an impossibility increasingly, whether you recognize it or not talking about research for a moment, but cardiology, that you're going to have, you have, in the field that I'm going to be going to, in interventional cardiology as a non-accredited heart failure background, that yes, heart failure is a separate PGY-7 fellowship. Okay, amyloidosis is a specialty within heart failure. But within interventional, you have people that do structural disease, so people that are implanting tablets. You have people that do intravascular ultrasound imaging, or IVUS, and optical coherence tomography, OCT. You have people that deal with chips, so high risk lesions too as well. You have people that deal with CTOs, chronic thrombotic occlusions. There's a lot of people that the point that I'm getting at is that there's a lot of people, and not everyone's going to be well experienced in everything. Because one of the things is, for example, if you're using IVUS or OCT, is that, well, maybe you don't know how to interpret the images, but you're echo board certified, you're nuclear board certified, your cardiology board certified, interventional board certified. You don't need to be a heart failure board certified to, to do interventional or to manage mechanical circulatory support. But the point is that this point was brought up in TCT, is that there's an impossibility from a time standpoint, never mind financial, but I mean, the financial part is often offset, but from a time standpoint, to become board certified across the board in all these different things. So again, the point that I want to highlight is down the road, if you're all interested in cardiology, what you're going to come to recognize is that there is a lot more to knowing in cardiology than I think that even you appreciate, even when going into interventional, and that's the stage that I'm at right now, and realizing that you're not going to be able to be an expert in all these different areas. It takes some time. So the same thing in research. That's why I think, again, highlights the importance of groups. It highlights the importance of the diverse experiences that everybody brings to the table. Even if you don't have research experience, you also come with a that is shaped by your background and your education and everything. And I think that that's an important point, a viewpoint, in which I frankly have learned from. So that's where I think it's very important in grouping. So you really want to have groups, and you really do learn from one another, and that's what I want to highlight. And this image I found online is something that I think is a very somewhat of a helpful way to think about things, where maybe you might, one might collaborate with two, but one might collaborate with three or four, at different times. Two may collaborate with three. But that's the nature across the board. And I think a specific concrete example I might give is the BNP and troponin project. So the BNP troponin project, now across the board, different institutions might have different assays, but this is where you might be able to collaborate, and maybe you might get some subgroup analyses. This is what's often done in I'll use the example of amyloid. So in rare diseases, in which you may have a population that you might be a specialty center, and you combine with somewhere else to, where you might enhance your power or ability to derive things. So I think this is an important point to think about. And I think that an important point in this endeavor is that we all learn from one another. And so this is the point where I think I want to highlight. Certainly, like, I think you could learn from me, but I also think that you're actually you're selling yourself short by not being able to utilize one another. And this is not to displace in any means, but I really do find that the experience that I learned in research, I learned a lot of different things from collaborating with others and their approach to things. Going to conferences, I learned a lot from their approach, and clinically, you also see this too as well. Someone might approach a problem, a clinical problem, in a different way. They may have a unique approach. They may have a technique, their own technique that they do. And you may adopt methods that you find that might fit and suit you in those scenarios. So that's why I also think that this is very helpful to kind of visualize and think about things along that way. So a little bit more about specifics into group dynamics. is you want to have obviously someone who's going to submit, right? Submitting, authoring, that's going to be very important. Now that while everyone, I do believe that there are no shortage of ideas and possibilities where everyone can be a first author. One person, I think what I try to do, and with the extent of the variables that would be potentially collected and the number of conferences and then the amount of free time or lack of free time that everyone has, is that one person could be a first author in something and someone else can be a first author. You guys can take turns. But at the end of the day, what we all benefit is that if you're a first author on one thing and maybe a second, third, or subsequent author on 4 or 5 other projects, then you have 5 or 6 submissions on your application. So and you all learn from one another, and I think that that's important from a productivity standpoint. And so that's where the group dynamics is very important. So maybe you all take turns. It does take more time than I think some of you might realize, and I don't know what feedback. I haven't received a lot of feedback on this, but what I can tell you, and this is why I certainly, with little to virtually there's no incentive for me, even in publishing, but it's submitting something can take some time. So an abstract or manuscript in the portal can take maybe around, if you're working very efficiently, 30 minutes to 1 hour. So if you have a deadline at 5 p.m. and it's 3:55 and you just save the final version in Word, you will have some work to do, and you may not even get it in by 5 p.m. So you want to factor that into your deadline planning. You also want to ensure, even if you have everything submitted and you go through all those things, now everyone has to have their disclosures updated and emails, and people might be away, people might be on call, people might have an admission. That is why I tell you that it's very important to ensure that you have all those ducks in a row. I can't emphasize enough. It's every conference, every journal will have their own particularities, maybe with font size, numbers, etc., about how they want things done. You want to have someone who can additionally, so someone who's going to submit that, take that time and take the lead. That's going to be important. You also want to have someone who can help with the formatting, grammar checks, and ensure it meets the formatting rules. So reading the rules, there's a lot to absorb, and in a short period of time. That's why I think having someone who's dedicated who's able to read that is going to be very important. So you want to make sure that you're using the correct reference formatting for when you're citing articles, or that you meet the word count, or that the word count's updated, or that the tables and the images and everything conferred to the manuscripts. You might create something in Word, and you might have the tables and everything all in one document, but that may not be uploaded the same way. That may have to be parsed into individual pages. Now, this is an ideal role, I think, for an intern or medical student. You don't, I would think at this point, most people have used Microsoft Word, but this is where I think could be very helpful in terms of delegating such a role and getting a starting point. Because then what the intern and medical student or someone who's earlier in residency can learn is begin to see, okay, you might see a table 1 and what that table 1 will consist of. Someone who can help with statistical analysis oftentimes is going to be someone who I think has a lot of more experience in the stat analysis portion of things. Another role that I think is ideal for an intern or medical student is someone who can help with the literature. So familiarizing yourself with the literature and putting yourself in a position. So for example, doing a meta-analysis project, you might be well versed in the literature. You might be able to opine in the comparative studies of a single center. So a B&P troponin, the Takotsubo study or the South Korea study, for example, like those are examples in which you have a specific study that you might be able to talk about. And if that's included in a meta-analysis, then you might be able to speak about that in assembly of a manuscript. And I mentioned before, and I've mentioned again, I think a manuscript is it's very ideal to have that submitted concurrently or fairly close to when you're doing an abstract, because of that Ebbinghaus forgetting curve, as I mentioned. So, ideally is that you want to have several projects on, and trying to come back to a project after some time can be a bit challenging and difficult because there's always a deadline coming up for another project. So I think that's why if you're a well-oiled machine, that you have some kind of template, and that's where these group dynamics are very helpful, because you do it, you get the things done, you submit it, and then you move on, because there's only so much time. And as we stand right now at the end of October, is for those of you who might be applying in the July cycle, is that comes up fairly quickly, a little bit further away, maybe 8 months from the AHA, but nonetheless, it's yeah, there's not a lot of time. There's less time often than you might realize. So in a manuscript, I have a template that let me highlight here on this template here, as many of you might have seen before. And if not, then I think that this is important for you to identify. So what I have here is a template, right? It's a zip file. And what I have here is that many times you can confer this accordingly to how you see fit. So an introduction, a methods, results, conclusion, and then oftentimes the references section. So this is an individual file. There's also a cover letter. So a cover letter is oftentimes included. The neat thing about this is that what I have are word fields. So many times that a lot of these things are fairly repetitive, can be inserted more than one more than one way. The bottom line is that you can see that there are several things that are included here. Figure one. So a figure one might have a caption or something. So these are things that very well that's why I think a group thing, and one person can try to do that, but I don't think realistically. I'm going to venture to say that nobody's going to be successful. And I even say 90%, 100% of people are not going to be successful if you're doing an internal medicine residency and you're trying to get a manuscript on your own. I just don't think you need a group. Every place I've seen is that you have a group. I think that's the tough part. Introduction, keys to write and rewrite. Okay, it's really an iterative process. Don't be afraid to put something down and it's horrible and it's horrible. But the key is to get something down into writing. Okay, that can be often informed if you're doing a single center retrospective from the introduction. That often can, that should be able to help guide you in a way. The methods and results sections are often templated, but obviously you want to structure it accordingly to reflect what's been done. So that often takes care of itself many times. And so the meat of things I find in many manuscripts are often the discussion section. So this is the interpretation of the significance of the data. What are your data findings and what does it mean? So it's really kind of the best way I think about it is the analogy of a SOAP note. You have subjective, you have objective. So the objective data in the SOAP note is essentially, you're not really presenting an interpretation of the hemoglobin of 8 is anemic. You're just presenting that the hemoglobin is 8. You're presenting that, that there's the white count, the white count's 15. And then your assessment plan is that leukocytosis secondarily due to, or anemia secondarily due to X, Y, and Z. So I think that the discussion is really much like an assessment and plan. So you want to compare what else is in the literature, and then this is where you can talk about the weakness and limitations. Specifically, if we talk about weakness and limitation of a single center retrospective, obviously when you're doing a retrospective, it's going to be confounding. There's always the risk that you can't control for a lot of variables. The external validity, a lot of these things. I mean, this is oftentimes, this is in a presentation. I mean, you might think to yourself, I have 5 minutes to talk, but 5 minutes is not a lot of time, actually. And so, but oftentimes, everybody knows what the limitations are in something. So, and I think, again, coming back again within a group, one person can learn from another's role. So a good way to get someone involved in a group is when you have a medical student, an intern, a second-year resident, someone who's relatively newer in research, is that maybe what you can do in one scenario is that you might help with the tables, you might help with the literature, and then from there, you might be able to become that expert in the literature in another group. So that's why having coalitions is very helpful. Somebody might have been able to be apprenticed under somebody else. So everybody has something to offer. I think everybody, in our group of nearly 30 people, is that there's a diverse range of experiences that everyone comes with. And if you all function well together, you're going to be able to be a lot more powerful and a lot more helpful. And you're all going to be more productive. And I think someone who's well-versed in statistical analysis can begin to help with writing a method section. Someone who's well-versed in literature, the specifics of a manuscript of the literature can help, be a consultant in a way. But ultimately, the important thing here is the productivity. So, and then one more final thing is that important to ensure that a project reaches its conclusion. So I mentioned about the 2-week deadline idea. Idealistically, you have 2 weeks, but that's sort of a factor that you really want to try to get to, and I think it's very helpful because That way you might realize, okay, well, we really need to clean this up, or we really need to do this or that. And or that the PI actually does not like this direction and needs some time to review it because they're busy, they're on call, they're on service, or or that they have something else, or they might be away. So you want to give everyone enough time to review and ensure that they agree with what's being said when you're committing your name. It's no small thing to commit yourself to a project. So it's not simply just putting your name down on something, because there's a lot of ramifications when you're submitting things. The reason why it takes 3 minutes to an hour is oftentimes there's a lot of check boxes to affirm that you have reviewed and that you agree with the content, and that, because if there's edits, if there are errors or things of that nature, it doesn't get changed. You can't change it, and you're basically signing that. So the other important thing is, do not count on extensions. Most places they may have an extension, and historically in AHA that's always been the case, but you really don't want to count on that. You really want to make sure that you have everything done. So you really want to work backwards. So I think the important thing is that you're working backwards to ensure that that you have you have what you plan to say for a given project. So yeah, I think that these are some important points that I just wanted to highlight and share. I think in the future, I have other ideas of how I want to move things along. And again, the goal of this is eventually for you all to develop a self-sufficiency. And I believe that at this point, there is, with the evidence of the success of single center IRBs, minimally exempt IRBs being approved, I think that's there. Now, I think the experience in of itself there is that, okay, well, you get it approved, yes. Now the yield on that, I think that the important thing is realizing that time is dwindling. I think your return on investment, if we're talking in economics, it lends itself to an open question. But that's where, again, the group part's very helpful. You have people that specialize in different roles. You all work together. It could be coalitions. Some people, you can learn from one another, adapt roles. But that's the important thing, and I think that's the key things I wanted to say about research. So I hope you found this helpful, and I will and feel free to let me know if you have any questions and anything that I can help with. All right, thanks a lot.